This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, NFL Picks Week 9 edition. Almost at double digits. What's going on here? I don't even know. But my name is still Sheldon Alexander. I'm joined by the Score's lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. And, I give the update here because I don't want any misconceptions here. My bad record continues. Okay. I've never been so happy to go 7-8-1. And that's only because of the prior 2 weeks were just way worse. But my positive mentality, right? We're just trajecting. We're going in the right direction. We're getting better, which means by the end of the year, I'll be back to the winning ways. I'm confident, still confident here. Vibes remain high, despite the fact, hold on, control room scrambling here because the keys are up here. We're not hiding the keys here. 7-8-1 last week, bringing the season total 59, 60, and 3. That's okay. We're doing okay. I'm all right. The vibes remain high. We remain positive. We are trending in the right direction. And I will be back on top where I would like to be. Mr. Matt Russell, how are you doing? I know your vibes are way higher than mine.
Yeah, they are a little bit higher. 10-5-1 for your boy this past week. And you go, okay, how did we get 3 games difference between the two of us, right?
Sports.
And well, sports for sure, but one, right? You're Kansas City Chiefs, right? Couldn't talk you out of there. So there's one game flipped.
I feel like the viewers are used to that by now, though, right? Like the viewers kind of get that by now. I hope.
Yeah, well,
the viewers are paying attention to that.
The Chiefs have a pretty good ATS record this year, so it hasn't necessarily cost you. But last week's spot was, especially as you saw the market kind of bring the Broncos down. Of course, you then eventually heard about Patrick Mahomes having some flu-like symptoms, etc. And it was just kind of the writing was on the wall for the Chiefs. We'll talk about them. Obviously, going forward, as the NFL's exported the best game of the week as far as basically they possibly could find. And then what are the other two? Right, we had the you had the Colts, and the Colts Saints was a game that, like, when we talked about it on Wednesday, it's like I honestly I don't really have an opinion on this game just yet. But that every once in a while, and because we record this on Wednesday, there's obviously a lot of runway between Wednesday and the actual games. That was a game, and maybe it happens, I wouldn't even say every week. It's probably maybe every second week where it just sort of like increases, you just like that game more and more over the course of, a few days, right? And when on Wednesday, you're like, I don't really know. Obviously, there's still, many days to do more research, et cetera, et cetera. And then you just kind of like by Saturday, for me, I was like, God, you're kind of looking at the injury report, obviously, with the Colts and like a lot of their secondary being banged up. And you're just like, man, I really feel like maybe the Saints are probably the right side, because the only argument that I could have against betting on the Saints in that game was like just not really wanting to trust Derek Carr and Dennis Allen. And, we'll talk about that, the concept of trusting them here this week. So it wasn't really much like I really loved trusting them in that game. It was just I don't really have anything else, to sort of say negatively with regards to that matchup. And then, of course, the third one was a combination of just bad beat City. And instead of me liking a game a lot more, like I did with the Saints and Colts, eventually we got to a point last week where the Cardinals were plus 10 at home against the Ravens. And it's like at -7.5, -8, or whatever it was, like when you have to make that pick, it's like, okay, like that's, a pretty reasonable point spread. But by the time we got to 10, it was like, all right, fine. Like you win, sports books. I'll take your Cardinals at plus 10 if I have to. And of course, at down 17 points, I'm sitting there just praying for a touchdown and I believe a 2-point conversion, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't we need that too?
It was real wacky.
Yeah, and then
conversions involved, onside kicks involved.
So I was just hoping that for a push to get to 10, and then the onside kick happens, and and eventually the field goal, and of course, the plus, or I should say the -7.5s, -8s go to die. So that, I think you were probably on the right side. I don't know if -10 on the Ravens was necessarily the right side, but certainly -8, -8.5 was the right side, and you just got beat by that. And so that's honestly, those three sort of examples are a pretty thin line, right? Sort of a stubbornness about the Chiefs, a kind of coin flippy type game that who knows what we should be picking on a Wednesday between the Colts and, and the Saints. and then obviously like a pretty brutal beat on what was a good number, because if you have the Ravens -8 and it closes -10 or -9.5, at least you're getting some semblance of closing line value and probably feeling pretty good about yourself when they're up by 17 or 18 points there. So, that again, that's the difference between a 10-5 and a 7-8 week, and just goes to show, right, the razor thin margins here, the tightrope that we're walking with regards to the quote unquote record. So
For sure.
I'm quite sure you're going to bounce back nicely here going forward, because we're on the right track, and I think we got the right needs this week.
Again, I think a lot of it is about mentality and not overreacting to good weeks or bad weeks, or trying to stay level in terms of I'm not trying to reach on my picks, if that makes sense. I will say week 9, 4 teams on the bye. You got the Broncos, Lions, Niners, and Jags all on a bye. I'll also mention that all of what Matt just said is also the importance of why you follow on social media, because there will be updates between when the picks are made on this pod and kickoff. Very important there. You see the info on the screen. And also, shouts to the people liking and subscribing wherever you get this podcast. We appreciate you. We thank you. And welcome back for another week of picks. As always, we start on Thursday night football, and we got the Titans at the Steelers. And this is a tough one for me because, first off, who's playing quarterback for, both teams? I think we know Will Levis is going to get another go again, but last week we were like, Will Levis or Malik Willett? Like, what's going on here?
Imagine a universe where we didn't have the internet, right? Like, how did they do this back, way back when, right? Where it'd be like, I would, as a fan, I'd be sitting there on Sunday, in the early 90s going like, who are these two quarterbacks? Like, what happened to my guys? So, yeah, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just like, this is not the only game where if we didn't have the information network that we have, you'd be sitting there going like, I don't know who these guys are, and I don't know who half of these guys are in the league. But luckily, we have at least the information with the media these days. But I don't know how it was done back in the 80s and 90s.
The bookie business had to have gone downhill, right? Because at the end of the day, and what I say downhill,
sure,
your profits have while they've gotten bigger,
sharper market. Yep.
Exactly. Yep, because you got to think about the fact that imagine trying to figure out what's your man's a Bears QB, Tyson Bagent.
Yeah.
Right? What? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? Anyways, Thursday night football. Titans, Steelers at home, laying 2.5 points. Not sure who is starting for the Steelers as of yet. There was some Trubisky noise last week, obviously, as Kenny Pickett was injured. And hey, Will Levis is a star, but I might remind people that anytime something this season in the NFL has been blown out of proportion into being the greatest thing ever, there's a tendency to crash and burn the following week. So I'm saying that as a Niners guy, and Brock Purdy, think back to the Lions, right? In the week that they had, and then they lost. We've just seen this trend over and over again. Anyways, with that said, I look at this game, and the tough part for me here is I need to know if Trubisky is playing. And I know that there's not a mega difference between Trubisky and Pickett, but I feel like at least Pickett will try to do stuff. Yeah. Whereas Trubisky, it's just check down city. It's just and I know that's their offense with Pickett. I know he's not much better, but he might try. Trubisky, I don't know what's going on here. I'm taking the points in what I think will be a low scoring defensive battle, and that's just where I'm at.
So I have a different opinion, and it's not even necessarily with regards to the side, because and it should be mentioned the side here, right? You're taking Tennessee plus 2.5, but again, get the Chiron folks in the control room fired up here. This line right now it's not an even line. It is essentially plus 2.75, right? Which means that if you want 3, you're going to have to pay minus 120. But if you want minus 2.5 on the Steelers, you also have to pay minus 120, which means if you want Tennessee plus 2.5, you're getting a plus money price, which, when we talk about quote unquote records, that's kind of a hidden element here, right? So if you're grading your pick off of plus 2.5 and it wins, you don't get that extra element of actually won 1.1 units the way you would in your betting account, right? So and I don't think it's fudging it by any stretch of the imagination, because these are commonly available prices at minus 120, maybe even a little bit less than minus 120 for Tennessee +3, and obviously +3 being the key number here, right? So if you want Tennessee, take the +3 at -120. If you want Pittsburgh -2.5, take Pittsburgh -2.5 at 120. And honestly, I think that's good advice with regards to pools, because a lot of people listen to this with regards to, okay, who should I pick for my pool? Right. And so if the line's 2.5, I'm probably taking the Steelers -2.5 in a pool. If the line's 3, most pools land on sort of a half number so that you don't have ties. But whatever, if the line happens to be 3, I would take Tennessee +3. And if it was 3.5, I would be all about Tennessee +3.5. That being said, I pretty clearly don't like one side or the other based on what I've just said there, as far as like what I would take. What I am going to be betting on is, and this is a rare situation, so I mean, God help us all here, I actually like the total here, because I don't think that this is necessarily, well, I shouldn't say, I was going to say I don't think this is necessarily a defensive battle, because both these teams they're outside the top 10 essentially in most defensive metrics, right? So this isn't like two top 5, two top 8 type style teams here defensively. The Steelers can't stop the run. What do you think the Tennessee Titans want to do here, right? And the Steelers can't run the ball. Well, the good news is you can throw the ball against the Titans. And so when you mention there isn't being necessarily a difference between Trubisky and Pickett, I would just disagree about that, because I would say that was a fair assessment when Kenny Pickett was a rookie, which is obviously an indictment on Mitch Trubisky, in that we had like, 5, 6, 7-year veteran who like is not better than the rookie Kenny Pickett, who probably wasn't ready to play last year. Kenny Pickett's development, again, as much as the offense is still a bummer, but that has more to do with the bad run game, the bad play calling. Kenny Pickett's development and his ability is much better than Mitch Trubisky's. He is much better at pushing the ball down the field when he's allowed to, and trying to just throw one up for George Pickens. Deontay Johnson is back. He had 16 targets last week. He's had over 75 yards in both games since he's come back. And having those two guys out there against the Titans secondary, I mean, they just traded Kevin Byard before last week. Now, Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, that combo, speaking of like ultimate quarterback combos, that combo is obviously not going to be able to take advantage of the Titans in, lack of ability to stop the pass game. And that's why we liked the Titans, or one of the reasons why we liked the Titans last week, outside of the fact that the line was completely and utterly insane, making the Falcons a 3-point road favorite in Tennessee against Mike Vrabel. This is obviously a different situation, though. You got like Will Levis going on the road in his first road start, his second start of his career. And as much as he played well, like, are you going to be able to rely on him to have 3 or 4 long pass completions? The answer to that is like, at least he's trying, right? And so with this total being 36.5, I don't have to tell you, that's a really low total. So it still could be a quote unquote defensive game, and the number could still go over in this game. But both these defenses have flaws, and all we're asking for is like a 20-17, 21-16 type of game. And both these defenses against, still pretty young quarterbacks, the defenses are better at turning the ball over than they are at necessarily stopping the other team. Yeah. And whether it's Trubisky or Pickett or a rookie quarterback on the road, or by the way, if it happens to be Ryan Tannehill, all those guys are fully capable of turning the ball over, creating short fields, maybe a defensive score. So I think there's a bunch of different ways that these teams can score that isn't sort of the traditional, like, hey, their offense was really good. It's more just like, man, what if Derrick Henry or Tyjae Spears cracks one, right? Which against the Steelers has happened all the time. What if TJ Watt gets involved and either creates a super short field for the Steelers or just scores a touchdown? I don't even know that we're necessarily having to rely on that. We would if we were looking for something to get into the 40s here. But like I said, we only need 37 points. A 20-17 type of game here, I think, is very reasonable. This is November in Pittsburgh, but it's not that cold out, and there isn't going to be a ton of wind. So the weather isn't going to be a factor. You're not going to show up and be like, oh my God, these guys throwing in this wind. These guys have been capable and are willing to throw it deep. It's kind of the only thing that the Steelers are good at offensively, and maybe it's the only good thing that Will Levis is capable of. So I think they're actually going to be a little bit more scoring than most people think. You can have your side in this game. Listen, if you told me you wanted to back Will Levis as an underdog on the money line, honestly, I wouldn't really get in your way of that either. So, I'm fine with you taking the +3 here, but I think the better bet is over 36.5, because the expectation is so low, and just there isn't anything there to tell me that like both these quarterbacks are completely incapable. Whereas most of the time when it's a number like this, it's because these quarterbacks are incapable against really good defenses in really suspect conditions. There's just kind of none of those things available, in this one.
Yeah, no, definitely going to be an interesting one to pay attention to for sure. And Tennessee +3 is a pick on Thursday night. But as we move to Sunday morning, and we're talking early morning because we are in Germany. Why would we take the best game on the sched and move that to Germany at 9 a.m.? I have no idea, but here we are. We got the Dolphins at the Chiefs. Chiefs 2.5-point favorites in this game. Serious question as I look back on what happened to the Chiefs last week. As we discussed, they fall to the Broncos. Was it Patrick Mahomes a little under the weather? Were they saving their best plays for the Miami Dolphins the following week? I don't know what was going on, but you know what would really help Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs? If their receivers could catch the ball. We'll see if that happens, if that can change at some point on a consistent basis. But either way, this is a massive, massive game for both teams, I'd like to say, in the AFC, and huge bounce back potential here for the Chiefs. And Miami's offense is still rolling, but I feel like Miami, when they had to go up a level in class, we have yet to see that so far. Jalen Ramsey coming back obviously is a help for them, but it was the Pats. I mean, the Chiefs at less than a field goal, I think we know what side I'm going to be on in this one. Give me the Chiefs laying the 2.5 points here.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think you said it pretty nicely there, right? With regards to, and it's obviously a little bit different because it's not a road game for the Dolphins. That being said, right, the Chiefs defense, pretty good. You're getting the, Spagnuolo against Tua's, matchup there, which I think, based on the fact that it's kind of not really worked all that well for Tua against Buffalo and Philadelphia and decent defensive coordinators. Again, that was a time when Buffalo was largely fully healthy, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not, you have to think about their defense then versus their defense now, which, that will be an interesting game when the Dolphins go against the Bills defense in their next matchup. Again, I think you summed it up pretty much up. You don't get the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes at under 2.5 very often. I certainly am fine with that number from like a valuation standpoint. My ratings come to 2.5. You could maybe say the market ratings, because the Chiefs came down a little bit in that game against the Broncos, but that was because of the health of Mahomes, that maybe it's a little bit short. But again, we also get the Dolphins keep getting increased when they play these kind of blowout setup type games, and they get credit for that. So, like a touch of value maybe on the Dolphins there from a market perspective. But again, from my perspective, I think this number's fair. And it really just comes down to like, which side do I prefer? And again, when it comes down to basically anything under a field goal, when you just need to win, the game is tied late, you are down 3, you're down 4, something along those lines, and you need Patrick Mahomes to come through, I want to be on the side of Patrick Mahomes. But I think this game is going to be a really interesting game because obviously for the two offenses and all the characters that are involved. But it'll be really interesting to see how the Dolphins defense holds up here. Not a strong unit necessarily this season, but again, were without Jalen Phillips for a really long time, without Jalen Ramsey for a really long time, potentially maybe getting Xavier Howard back in this game, Juwan Holland, et cetera, right? Like, this is a super talented Dolphins team when they're at full strength, and we just haven't necessarily seen them at full strength. But getting them back at full strength against Mahomes and the Chiefs maybe isn't the time to get super excited about the Dolphins defense until we see it. That might be coming, in weeks to come.
Yeah, super interesting game there, and I can't wait to see it. The interesting part is I just want to send a reminder to the people. Make sure you get your bets in early for this one, as this one is super early in the morning before people wake up for sure. If we keep it going here, a couple good games here. The Cowboys at the Eagles. Eagles at home, favored by 3 points. And I feel like these teams, we talked about it a lot, divisional game. These guys always play close. Cowboys played the Eagles really well last year, when I feel like the Eagles were a lot better than they are this year so far. But Eagles are rolling. AJ Brown's been kind of unstoppable so far, like the last little run there, which is cool. But the Cowboys, coming off a bye, took care of business last week. This is a very interesting matchup for me, but I got to take the Cowboys and the points here, especially at the number that it is, which is 3. Give me the points there. I like the Cowboys to keep this one close.
Yeah, for those of us who feel like they have the market cornered in Offensive Player of the Year this year with Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown needs to just calm it down a little bit. Okay. Just ease up on us here, guys. Like, I was kind of just waiting for one of those two bets to cash and not have to worry about a third party just bucking his head and getting involved midway through the season. But that's certainly where AJ Brown seems to be headed here. Not going to talk out of this one. In fact, I've already made the bet on Dallas +3. I have this being a little bit tighter because I think these two teams, for all the ups and downs both of them have gone through, especially Jalen Hurts kind of being banged up here. I just look at this and I go, like, I think these two teams should be rated pretty darn close to equally. And as we know, home field advantage is kind of closer to around 2, especially when it's not a night game in the link. Like, you could talk me into 2.5, maybe if this was a night game. You certainly can't get me all the way to 3, especially being a key number of 3 where we get a push on a field goal win by the Eagles. The Hurts injury is the issue for me, right? Like, if he's unable to do the things that make him an MVP candidate, if you will, then this isn't going to be like the Commanders where it's just going to be like Devontae Smith is just running freely in the secondary and Hurts is going to be able to pick him, pick them apart. Or not even really need to. Are you still picking someone apart when they're leaving guys wide open? I don't even really think you're being picked apart at that point. You're sort of picking yourself apart. And then obviously from an offensive standpoint, impressive stuff from the Cowboys last week. They're kind of cooking here a little bit, and the Eagles. Man, I feel like I willed home the Eagles. I had some, -6.5. I had -7 in my column because at that point, that's what the number was. But like, I just willing the Eagles home after getting down to the Commanders, who, bit of a shoulder shrug team in general, as far as like what they're bringing to the table. So like, yeah, and we've talked about it, right? From an offensive coordination standpoint, et cetera. Like, there are some issues with the Eagles, but I just look back at last year, and obviously the fun part about this game, along with obviously, the Dolphins and KC and a couple of others where this is kind of a bangers only Sunday, is that we didn't get this game last year in its true sense, right? But what I did sort of, what was clear to me is that, as much as Gardner Minshew was involved in the second time around, the Cowboys were able to score on the defense, right? That game, that wasn't like a 20-17 type game. I think that game was up in the 30s. And when Cooper Rush was in that game against Philadelphia, yes, Philadelphia won that game and they eventually separated. But like, they were doing okay. Like, Dallas was hanging in there with Cooper Rush, which I believe was, if I'm not mistaken, might have been his first game of the season in that little sort of, is Cooper Rush really good portion of the program last year. Yeah. So, I think the Cowboys match up well against the Eagles here, and we're getting 3 points. Certainly they're, widely familiar with the Eagles, with the link, if you will. And, not having to deal with that at night, I think is obviously an element here that's going to be a little bit in the Cowboys' favor, at least giving them a break, because this easily could be, a Sunday or Monday night game that everybody would be excited for at 4:30. I think that's still certainly going to be the case, but that makes me feel a little bit better about taking the Cowboys here in this one at +3.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Cowboys +3. Another very interesting matchup to me is the Seahawks at the Ravens. Ravens laying 5.5 points at home. And I can't lie to you, I'm a little confused by the Ravens just because they look really good at points. And then at other points, Nelson Aguilar can't catch a ball. Like, why are you trying to let an onside kick bounce and catch it off the bounce right in front of you? Like, what? Right. Sorry. I'm trying to.
Well, for a guy whose career has been like dropping touchdowns and dropping back passes,
why is he on your hands team?
That's like, a great question. Him? Right? It's my old favorite, like Arrested Development, right? Where Michael Bluth, or the son, George Michael, has the girlfriend.
Yeah.
And his dad's just like, her? It's the same kind of deal, right? Where it's like, they get in the meetings like, okay, Nelson's going to be our hands team guy. And then everybody just goes, him?
Yeah, like one of the most famous viral clips is a dude mocking Nelson Aguilar's hands after he caught a baby.
That's right,
dropping out of a window during a
fight. He's had such a he had such a really good resurgence here with the Ravens. Mm-hmm. And it's just so funny that, like, and again, no one, who's counting wins and losses is going to remember this, but certainly the bettors will. But it's just funny that, like, he's finally had a key drop, and it wasn't from a pass; it was from an onside kick. It's like, I don't know, the NFL is so dumb.
Sorry, it's just I had to go on that tangent for a second there. This game, the 5.5 point spread is a weird one. I look at this game and I think the big thing for me is the Seahawks. They're still they're getting wins, but they're not impressive wins. Like, they were lucky to get out of that victory last week against the Browns, but they're putting numbers up. They're winning games. I just think this is a different class here, and I don't like laying 5.5 points with the Ravens because I think that's a lot of points. But I'm laying the 5.5 points here because I just don't think the Seahawks are ready for what the Ravens can do if they're playing to their potential.
Well, as of Wednesday afternoon, there are still a lot of 5.5s out there, but there's also a lot of 6s. And I'm taking Seattle +6 in this game because, you mentioned obviously this is a different weight class, and that's absolutely true, but it's also a different requirement, right? So this isn't a situation of changing weight classes and asking a team to do the same thing that they've had to do against the Cardinals, where it was like win by margin, or the Browns, which like that was an inflated point spread that asked them to do too much. And, eventually it got to 4.5. And so they didn't cover the closing line, but they covered or pushed all the early numbers. And, I disagreed with the idea that that number should have been as high as it was and, bet that accordingly. That being said, right, we're not asking them to win by any sort of margin here. We're just asking them to keep it close. I actually think they can win this game. And I've been, up and down on the idea of the Seahawks. And like, obviously I'm still not sold on Geno Smith necessarily, but this is a game of matchups here. And I think from a wide receiver versus secondary, schematic type of matchup, this actually is a pretty good one for the Seahawks. And I think the Seahawks, as they've gotten healthier here, they're using both their running backs, right? Zach Charbonnet, got high praise from Pete Carroll. Of course, it's an NFL coach, which means Zach Charbonnet will probably get 2 carries and, be ignored next week, but he might be a decent option when it comes to like prop betting type stuff, because I believe his number was something along the lines of like 19.5 or something. And so if he's getting essentially the same amount of snaps as Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker's line is up in the 50s and the 60s, and in some cases even in the 70s, I think there's some value there. All that is to say, like, I think this game's going to be close, and we're talking about at +6, kind of that OT prevention, type thing, where it's like, all right, if it goes to OT, the worst thing that can happen here is if we push. Now, the Seahawks defense, Jamal Adams being back, obviously the development of their corners, Witherspoon is an absolute star, it looks like. That's going to be, I think, problematic for a Ravens team who, like, doing better passing the ball, but like running the ball is how they set everything else up. And the Seahawks, we've talked about this before, they went into this offseason, immediately in the offseason, and were like, defensive line, complete and utter overhaul. Like, didn't even like try to trade a bunch of guys. They just cut them and they started fresh and they brought in a bunch of new guys. And the run defense has been outstanding, with last week notwithstanding, right? And that was kind of the interesting thing about the Browns, is like, especially when you got down to the point of the off Jamal Adams helmet interception on 3rd and 3, where you're like, Stefanski, man, like, just run the football. But he was afraid to run the football against the Seahawks, even though they were having success in doing so. So that was a little more than a little bit frustrating here. So as I see you change it here to +5.5, I'd tell you to change it to +6, because +6 is widely available. Like, you can get +6 right now. And again, you should probably be able to get it, assuming everything is moving though in the direction, across the board, that some of the sharper sports books, by the way, which is always a little bit unnerving, but listen, doesn't always work. Just ask just ask those who are betting the Raiders on Monday night with whatever the hell that was when it came to Raiders steam, and people thinking that was, a particularly great idea. I think the Seahawks are live to win this game. I think I was impressed even in a loss in that road trip to Cincinnati, a team that, again, I'm high on the rest of the way. Talk about them here shortly as part of Bangers Only Sunday. The Ravens, by the way, it's been 3 weeks since they just inexplicably lost a game to an inferior team. And I'm not even super sure that the Seahawks are necessarily an inferior team, especially at their quote unquote best, which, like, based on their defense, where even the pass defense is starting to get a little bit better against some obviously mediocre quarterbacking, or with Josh Dobbs and the PJ Walkers of the world, etc. This is a team that can hang, right? They went to Detroit and they won. They went to Cincinnati, and again, other than Geno Smith kind of turning the ball over a ton late, they went and they won that game. And all of a sudden, as you are well aware, they are in first place in the NFC West. Now, I don't know how long that's necessarily going to last, especially after this weekend with this tough game. But this is a game that they can hang in. So getting 6 points, I'm absolutely into. I will also be on them in the money line.
Yeah, I got you. The pick has been changed. Seahawks +6. Yeah, getting to that number of 6 is huge. And also the ask, right? I think that's the important part. Not necessarily asking them to win the game. Just keep it spicy. Keep it close. I like that. Vikings at the Falcons. Falcons favored by 5 points here, and I'm going to be very honest about something here. I don't even know who's starting at QB for the Vikings.
Nobody does.
Correct.
Well,
but looking at the Falcons being favored by 5 points versus anybody is a tough spot for me to be at. Can't lie to you there. Although I will say, if you told me that Taylor Heineke was involved, you could talk me into being on the Falcons at -5. But for some reason, we're still here, and I don't get why we can't get enough of Taylor Heineke, especially after we saw him come in and do some work. Look all right. Yeah. I just don't understand what's going on here. But either way, I'm told there's a rookie named Jaron Hall who could be starting. The Vikings also traded for Josh Dobbs. I don't think he'll be ready to go, obviously, just getting traded there. That Baker Mayfield thing from last year is still one of the weirdest things ever. Remember that? He got traded, gets off the bus, starts in a game. It's just like, how is this happening? What's going on?
Yeah, and he's not even a rocket scientist. And Josh Dobbs is. Like... Josh Dobbs could honestly, like, he could make an entire career for a really long time being this, like, middle of the season, you know, you buy Josh Dobbs, right? You put him on your roster, knowing that, like, in week 8, you're going to be able to upgrade a 7th-round pick to a 6th-round pick or a 6th-round pick to a 5th-round pick. He's just, like, he is a commodity because you know that people look at Josh Dobbs and they go, like, you know what? He can learn a playbook in like a week because we saw it again. It wasn't just this season, right, where he got traded from Cleveland to Arizona. It was last season when he got signed off the street to go to Tennessee, and like they darn near won the division, right, in basically a week and a half. You know, he had that obviously rough game. I think it was against Dallas on a Thursday night, but by the following week against Jacksonville, they were right in it. Now, of course, I think he fumbled the ball and they ended up in Jacksonville ran that back for a touchdown. But I digress, right? And so for me, like, I'm right there with you. I've got a little bit of Minnesota +5. I think maybe there's a chance we get to 6 here once we get some clarity on quarterback. But just think about the idea that, like, people backing the Falcons, cheering for the Falcons, or, you know, have Falcons futures tickets, or, you know, are sort of invested in any way, shape, or form in Atlanta, wanting Taylor Heineke to be your quarterback, and then, like, being more interested in laying points if Taylor Heineke was your quarterback. It's like we get into this space, and honestly, I say this every week, is like, these are the spaces that we need to be trafficking to win bets or to be above 500, these overreaction situations. And for every situation where you're going to make this bet and you're going to be like, oh God, Jaron Hall is terrible. Josh Dobbs doesn't know any of the plays. You know, like, we walked right in, it was less than a touchdown. We're so dumb. For every one of those, there are going to be 2, maybe even 3 that are going to be like, I don't know, all the other ones this season, where, you know, whether it's been like the Cleveland, San Francisco ones, or, you know, some of these other, where, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, we're talking about him, like, that's this Vikings team going against Ritter, who, what was his run? 3 interceptions, 3 fumbles, and then concussed. Like, that was his last 3 weeks.
Yeah. Like, concussed is in, like, the new thing is like telling people you're concussed when you actually stink. Like, that's the move in the NFL, where no coaches can admit that they've benched a quarterback. Everybody just goes, oh, we were making sure, like, he was okay. And it's like, since when do you ever care whether your quarterback's okay? So I guess my point where I'm going with this is, like, because the Vikings are getting a notable downgrade at quarterback with Kirk Cousins being out, we tend to forget that, like, the remaining circumstance of the Vikings quarterback room is not necessarily that much or at all worse than the current situation of the Falcons quarterback room.
Correct.
Right? Like, why is Josh Dobbs straight off the street and Jaron Hall definitively so much worse than this Sophie's Choice, this reverse Sophie's Choice, super topical reference, of Desmond Ritter and Taylor Heineke? Like, if you just switched the 4 quarterbacks to 2 for 2, you know what I mean? Is it like really changing the landscape here in a game that, by the way the Vikings had been playing, probably the Vikings would have been favored, right? Like, I had, like, most recent ratings were kind of like Vikings pick 'em, but, like, based on a pretty convincing road win against the Packers last week, if Kirk Cousins is healthy in this game, especially after watching the Falcons, which, again, I don't know what people's obsession here is with the Falcons all season long, they've got 4 out of their 8 games where they've scored 16 points or fewer.
Yeah.
So if you told me against a Vikings defense that I know everybody kind of lazily looks at last year and goes, well, the Vikings defense is bad, feel free to take a look at 2023 metrics for the Vikings defense. We talked about this against the 49ers. I called the Vikings to win that game outright, but mainly because of the value that we were getting on the Vikings, because nobody seems to realize that the Vikings kind of have a top 10 defense. And only like 2 teams give up more yardage on the ground, which is exactly what the Falcons want to do. So if the Vikings have a good run defense, they're known for blitzing, and Brian Flores blitzing either Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke. Why do we think the turnover truck here is just going to like fall off, the rails here?
Because we saw a good quarter from Taylor Heineke. That's all.
Right, quote unquote good corner. And I guess the truck probably should have been a train based on the fact that it was on rails. But my point is like, can't the Vikings just on basic offense, like play action passing and short passing and whatnot, can't they get to 17 points?
Just be functional.
Can't they get to 17 points? At which point, like, if the Falcons, who again, half the time get 16 or fewer, and in some cases against far worse defenses, i.e. the Washington Commanders, and in the other situations, very comparable defenses to Minnesota, like, isn't the expectation for the Falcons kind of about 3 field goals and a touchdown, no matter who the quarterback is here? So, like, think about that. What's required if they get 16 points? All that it takes is 17 to win here at basically plus 200 on the money line for the Vikings, or 13 points to cover. That's not asking much out of Josh Dobbs and or Jaren Hall. And as far as we know, Jaren Hall, first team reps all week, pretty experienced quarterback from BYU, super mobile guy, right? There's a bunch of stuff potentially if they can get in the playbook. And we just talked last week about how impressive Kevin O'Connell was in offensive coordinating the Vikings against the 49ers. Kirk Cousins isn't going to be running zone reads and options and scrambling and picking up extra first downs via his legs. He tries sometimes, and I guess sometimes he does, but he's not going to be the danger that Jaren Hall is, or Josh Dobbs, by the way. So these are 2 mobile quarterbacks that we have to choose from here for the Vikings. So I just look at this and I go, like, the Falcons by like a touchdown with those 2 quarterbacks, when like the Vikings might not really even need to throw that much to be able to make to move the ball into kind of field goal range here, where you've got kickers, especially indoors, drilling stuff in the mid 50s to the high 50s, like left, right, and center. Maybe it's just one 59-yard field goal in the third quarter makes the difference between winning and losing, or covering and non-covering in this game. And if that's going to be the slim margin, like, give me the points in this one, because I think the Vikings can win this game outright, because, by the way, they also have pretty good players up and down the roster, certainly comparable to the Falcons. And I know they just traded a guard, Ezra Cleveland. But you know what? Grady Jarrett just blew out his ACL for the Falcons, right? And so I'm going to call that a draw when it comes to the interior line play in this game. So, yeah, absolutely give me the Falcons. I'm going to wait and see. Maybe we get +6 when people get a little bit crazy about Taylor Heineke.
You mean give me the Vikings?
Yeah, give me the Vikings. Sorry, plus, yeah, exactly. When people get a little excited about the quarterback mismatch, quote unquote, in this game, yeah, this is Vikings or nothing.
Yeah, I got you. And as we move on to the Rams and the Packers, Packers at home favored by 3 points. Packers have lost 4 straight games to the Lions, Raiders, Broncos, and Vikings. Just going to say that again.
They're not good.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with the Packers, because things sort of took a turn all of a sudden this season where they just don't look good at all. They can't do anything in the first half of games, which is just a weird look for a head coach that's supposed to be pretty good. But yeah, as I look at this one, the Rams come into this game. I'm on the Rams +3 here, just because taking the points with, if you're telling me one offense is struggling, the other offense at least can be, serviceable at times. Matthew Stafford, Puka, and Cooper Kupp, keep it close. I'll take those points for sure. Give me all those points, especially if you're telling me that you're going to get a head start every week because the Packers don't show up on time.
Yeah.
Give me the 3 points with the Rams.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the main thing here is Matthew Stafford's involvement in this game, right? Because last we saw him, he was getting his right hand taped up pretty significantly. Yet they still have him out there like catching passes on 2-point conversions, getting, blown out by the Cowboys. Does anybody know anything? Does anybody have a brain in the coaching, realm in the NFL? It seems like that's not the case at all. So, okay, let's start with the Packers here, just, really quickly, because I wanted to say that we have a stable rating for the Packers. But the reality is, like, we kind of don't, because we came into this season going like, okay, what's their range? What's their average? Well, their average is probably an average team, 50 out of 100. You know, they go in like underdogs against the Bears, which is funny. Bears, you know, they beat the Bears pretty comfortably in that game. And we go, okay, you know, people thought decently highly of the Bears. Remember, they were lined at like 7.5 wins this season. Speaking of things that were funny. And so we go, okay, but like, look how banged up the Packers were, right? And every week it would be like, well, they might be fine. And their rating would then drop throughout the week as their players dropped from availability throughout the week. And then like they started getting guys back. And again, it's just been in and out with regards to like their, injury situation. So I want to say that they're at the bottom of their range at 40. You know, if their range is 40 to 60, I want to say that they've been at the bottom of their range and that we should buy. Anytime a team is at the bottom of their range, we should buy. The problem is with so much uncertainty about the Packers, which again, we kind of thought we had some certainty, but we don't really because they keep losing. Their range is probably a lot lower than we had set up. Maybe their range is 30 to 50, not 40 to 60. So all of a sudden, as we start kicking them downwards through to 40, 41, or from 41 to 40 to into the mid 30s, you know, we certainly can't be going higher. So we have to be down on the Packers for obvious reasons. We'll leave that there. As for the Rams, we always do the thing, right? When a quarterback is out or when there's a line, okay, what does this mean, et cetera, right? And so we had the Rams a kind of an average team, which again, like I think that suits them quite nicely, right? Where it's like when they play a really good team, it's going to be tough. They might have a chance to upset that team, but they're really more likely to kind of win and compete against these middle tier type teams. So with Stafford healthy, based on the rating from last week, this should be about a pick 'em. So if we've downgraded the Packers from last week, then the Rams should actually probably be closer to like a 1 or 2 point favorite in this game, which means the fact that the Packers are 3-point favorites in this game, which means that there's a real feel that Matthew Stafford isn't going to play in this game. And so at that point, we have to play around with the Rams rating to sort of reverse engineer it and be like, okay, what are the Rams rating when they are as a 3-point underdog to this Packers team, who honestly, we haven't found the bottom of the market yet, or it certainly doesn't feel like we found the bottom of the market yet. So if I change the Rams rating from 49, which is last week's rating, to like 40, what do we come up with? -2.5. So we got to go even further than 40 downwards. Right, to move this number up. So we're looking at something in the mid to high 30s for the Rams, which is obviously the rating for a backup quarterback. Now, ironically, we didn't plan this. You already mentioned last year's circumstance of Baker Mayfield coming off the street and being able to play like just well enough to win a game. Now, obviously, that was 55 minutes of terrible football and then one like decent throw against, I believe it was the Raiders, which I mean,
yeah, it was the Raiders.
Yeah. So, as you might say, yeah. So if we're going to rate the Rams in the low 30s, we're doing so based on the idea that Stafford's out and that the replacement quarterback is not going to be good, which are all sort of theories, right? Stafford could play. The replacement quarterback and Sean McVay could, draw up just enough stuff here for him to be good or good enough. We saw that they tried to get John Wolford back this week, who's on, I believe, Tampa Bay's practice squad. There's a lot going on, man, with these rando quarterbacks, but like apparently they pulled him off the practice squad and gave him I guess you have to bump him up to the main roster. So that was sort of thwarted, but it's because the Rams don't really have any other quarterbacks on the roster.
Yeah.
Other than was it Rippon who played last week? By the way, like we've seen some Rippon before. It's not like he's a guy off the street.
Yeah.
And if he's been in the room, that has to be sort of more advantageous than Baker off of the street last year. So I guess it's like, how far can we go here with the Rams? And I know all of this is to say that I agree with your pick. So it's like, I'm convincing you of a thing that you've already kind of done here. But like, we haven't reached the bottom with the Packers. The bottom that we're sort of basing this off of with the Rams is hypothetical, right? It's estimated. It is frankly made up. at this point. Like, I just don't know how you go, yeah, like give me the Packers here -3. And honestly, I think it's even a little bit higher than 3. I have to just double check that, so I'm not like lying to you. Of course, by the time this is running here, like, yeah, there's some there's a 3.5. I mean, it's in faraway places here, but there's some 3.5s with some juice. I mean, you know,
I hear you.
DK's got a 3.5 -118. There's some other ones that have 3.5.
I hear you.
I got to tell you, like, it's the type of thing that, okay, you can bet the 3.5 now. If Matthew Stafford starts, this line's dropping to pick him. And you just got 3.5 complimentary points against a team that, frankly, I think is bad. If Matthew Stafford doesn't start and you're getting 3.5, yeah, this might go to 4, 4.5, 5. Like, we saw that with Deshaun Watson got ruled out and that line moved another point last week, and that obviously ended up being a definitive point. But like, when you're watching that game, you're like, I'm not sure the Browns are necessarily worse than the Seahawks. So just look at this and I go, like, yeah, you can take your 3.5 now and probably get some decent value on it, and maybe you don't, maybe it goes the other way. But I think honestly the difference between 3.5 and 5 is probably not necessarily all that significant. Again, I say that having just kind of gotten quasi burned on that last week with regards to the Browns. So it's like, yes, you have to make a pick now, and I would certainly take the 3 or 3.5 now. But obviously, listen, by the way, like, Matthew Stafford plays through a lot of stuff.
He does. He definitely does.
And it's like, if he can grip the football, because it's a hand thing, right? So it's like, if he can grip the football, like, I think he's going to be out there. This isn't like a weird shoulder type situation where it's like, yeah, structurally, like, it could get worse. And yeah, he could smash his hand against another helmet, and I assume that would make it worse. But like, this is Stafford, man. Like, he's honestly one of the tougher quarterbacks in the NFL. So would you be shocked if he did, if he didn't play in this game, or if he did play, in this game? Like, I certainly wouldn't be. So yeah, I think if you have to make a play on this game, I haven't made a bet on it yet, because I'm kind of going to take something of a wait and see attitude, especially if there's these sorts of things as practice reports come out. Let's put it this way. This is Wednesday afternoon. Obviously, it's the Rams, so they're not going to play till they're not going to have a practice report until later in the afternoon. He's probably not going to practice on Wednesday.
Exactly.
But he might not practice. You know what I mean? It's a vet, right? Like, he's probably not going to practice anyway on a Wednesday. But in this case, when he doesn't practice, this might lean this line even further to where we want it to go, which is obviously higher, so that we can get a better number on the Rams. But like, he might just come out and practice on Friday and be good to go. And so I'm just going to wait a couple of days here, see if we can get an extra half point, get this up to, a flat 4. Flat 4 is probably a nice spot where I would buy and be completely fine, even if it went to 5 or 5.5. I'd be completely fine with the Rams here. Because again, what have we seen from the Packers that makes us want to lay points with them at any point?
No, totally hear you there. Speaking of interesting 3.5 point spreads, got the Commanders at the Patriots. Patriots at home laying 3.5 points. I don't know how that's a thing, really. Like, I understand that Commanders struggle on the road. They have not looked good on the road. They played pretty well against the Eagles last week, which they typically always do, but still, laying 3.5 points with Mac Jones and the Patriots is not a place I want to be this season with this iteration of the New England Patriots. So give me the Commanders in the points, especially at +3.5.
Yeah, I'm not knocking the women and children off out of my way to bet the Commanders here, but this is certainly the side I would have to take. And so the reason is, that this line is the way that it is, and this is a line that opened like -1.5, -2. The Patriots got pretty quickly bet to 2.5 with, juice to the Patriots, where you'd have to pay like a -120 to get to get -2.5, get under a field goal with the Patriots. And honestly, where it opened up, where the money line was kind of like I think there was some -135s available on the money line. Like, I didn't hit it, but I certainly thought that was a decent bet. Then the Commanders go and they trade two of the 4 things that we like about the Commanders on a weekly basis, right? The defensive line. And so when they move Sweat and they move Young, that's the thing where it's like, it isn't just those guys being, taken out of the mix. It's the overall concept of like, well, this team is, the old T word, right? They're packing it in on the season. And so the rumors or the sort of murmuring is that this was very sort of organizational ownership. The rebuild, if you will, was very much like the ownership saying like, all right, like, let's get some get something for these guys. I believe it was a 2nd-round pick and a 3rd-round pick for those players. And, when you look at that and you go, okay, the ownership doesn't think we have, what it takes, so to speak. Like, I don't know how the Commanders are going to react to that, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Sweat, I believe, was the guy who had comments before the previous game or after the game before this Eagles game, right? About how like he was bummed out and, all of the stuff and things have to change. And then they actually had a nice little start against the Eagles, right? And obviously we're, very close to kind of winning that game. So I'm with you. Like, I don't, I usually don't really buy into the idea of like a team kind of quitting or like being sad or like, how does this look and da-da-da-da-da. So, and we're getting across the key number of 3. So like, I would take the Commanders plus 3.5 versus the idea of the Patriots, like winning by a margin here. I do have a problem with the idea of Sam Howell on the road against Bill Belichick and, the Patriots, and I don't know why we aren't better at this every year, but like Patriots in the first half of the season, it should be a fade, should be a sell. Patriots in the second half of the season should usually be a buy, right? And that's just kind of, even back to the days of Tom Brady, that's kind of always how it should be. We are, it was awfully close to not covering last week, in the Dolphins Patriots game. I had the Dolphins, minus the 9 there. The Patriots have looked a little bit better. And if you told me that they just absolutely sacked the bleep out of Sam Howell, who just spends all of the days, all of the weeks, all of the games getting sacked the bleep out of, I couldn't, I wouldn't be all that surprised. Yeah. So if the Commanders just like got shut out, right, I wouldn't be stunned. Like if this was just 16-6, I wouldn't be shocked. So maybe the under is the play. But again, when you make the under, you say, let's bet the under. And you just watch 2 guys on the defense get shuffled out. It's kind of really hard to like an under just sort of conceptually. So not my favorite game this week, but yeah, I think Commanders plus 3.5 from at least just a value standpoint is where I would go.
Yeah.
If I had
strange.
To, I don't.
Strange one for sure. This is also a strange one as we got the Cardinals at the Browns. Browns laying 8 points. There's whispers. Could we be seeing Kyler Murray this weekend for the Cardinals?
No.
There's whispers, but this line would lead me to believe
the whispers,
that
people have been shouted down. The whispers have been shouted down.
So isn't it interesting though? They trade away Dobbs. Cool, because it's a trade deadline, and we're just gonna go 1 week and just kind of let it ride here and see what's going on. An interesting one, but 8 points either way still seems like a lot of points for me here, and I can't lay 8 points with the Browns and PJ Walker or Deshaun Watson. I mean, it's a tough sell. It's a very tough sell. Like I get it and I understand it, but I just watched Arizona like somehow backdoor cover. Arizona's a weird team because they keep getting blown out. Right. Cool. But it's not by PJ Walker's offense.
No,
but it could be
by their
PJ
own
Walker's defense.
Volition. Yeah, I was gonna say it's like it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I mean, listen, 8 points it sounds like a lot. Right up into the point where like Clayton Tune is dropping back to pass against the Browns. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so it's like, because Kyler isn't going to play, or at least, that's the suggestion was it was going to be either Clayton Tune or Kyler Murray. And they're like, no, we're giving Kyler another week. And I'm not really sure why. I mean, I'm certainly not, privy to like how healthy he is. It seems like he's fully healthy. People have, the things that have been said about, his recovery and how he looks in practice are pretty glowing. Like people seem to be like, oh man, like he's out there balling. Do they want him to come back and have his first game against Atlanta at home? Like,
yeah,
you know what? I guess that feels like a sort of more comfortable situation here. And, you just mentioned, obviously they just backdoor, but it's like, okay, like a double backdooring with like a side of like a, onside kicking and 2-point conversions and God knows what else, right? It's like, yeah, how about we just take it from the point before things got super fluky and looked at the Cardinals like that as the team that just keeps getting beat by 2 scores.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, oh, yeah, no, they do. And like 1 out of every 4 or every 5 times that they're getting beat by 2 scores, they execute a backdoor. And it's like, okay, I'll take my chances on that sort of like 4-to-1 type of ratio here. Against again, by the way, like we had a lot more confidence in Josh Dobbs. And it was really interesting that they're like, we're going to bench Josh Dobbs after looking at the tape. I just kind of wonder, like, okay, well, when was the trade, right? So like Sunday, it's like,
exactly.
no, Josh Dobbs is going to be the quarterback. And then Monday, it's like, well, we looked at the tape and it's either going to be Clayton Tune or Kyler Murray. And then Tuesday, it's like, actually, Josh Dobbs is traded. It's like, well, could you, I guess what else was he going to say other than, you know what I mean? Other than like, I guess, like, what's your excuse if you know that your quarterback who's going to get traded tomorrow isn't going to play? Like, what are you supposed to say there, right? I guess you say like, yeah, we looked at the tape, which is so funny that like they're like, yeah, we looked at the tape and he wasn't good enough. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, and then the Vikings are like, we'll take him, right? He's not good enough for the Cardinals.
Like, wait a second here.
Yeah, it's like if the Cardinals aren't into you, like, it's like if Newman's dating you, I don't know if I want to. But anyway, so I just look at this, and again, I haven't made the bet. The more I talk about it, the more I'm like, why would I be interested in the Cardinals? Like, of course I would take Cleveland -8, a team that, again, like, they're probably a drop pick 6 away from beating the Seahawks, maybe particularly handily in that game last week, right? Like, that's the thing. As much as we look at the ball hits Jamal Adams' helmet, goes flying in the air, and like basically, multiple Seahawks could have camped underneath it to get that touchdown. And then, by the way, like, there was a hold on the receiver on the final Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown. I'll go to my grave arguing that. Even if the announcers were like, look at how great he does, it's like, pretty sure he was holding. So, I just look at this and I go like, yeah, I think the Browns in a game where, like, how are the Cardinals going to score points? And by the way, the Cardinals defense isn't any good. So, like, I kind of feel like this feels like a 23-6 type of game, right? Yeah. So it's like, man, 8's going to feel like a lot until all of a sudden Cleveland's up 10-0. And then you're like, all right, how do the Cardinals get back into this? And it's like, well, is it, Amari DeMarcado or whatever his name is and Clayton Tune out here cooking? It's like, no, that's
probably not
where I want to be with this. So definitely, by the way, like, teaser, -8 down to -2. Yes. Definitely survivor pick. Like, when is it going to get better for Cleveland this season? True. Right. Very so true. Those sort of quote unquote just wins or just win by a field goal bets, or plays, if you will. Absolutely, that's where you want to be, and obviously takes out the element of the quote unquote backdoor, which I don't think you're gonna have to deal with for a second straight week.
That's the hope. That is the hope indeed. I don't like this game either. The Bears at the Saints. Saints laying 7.5 points, and I can't believe, even as I stare at it on the screen, New Orleans -7.5. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. This doesn't seem like a good thing to do. This line has shot up like crazy, right? Like, the line has just been moving up and up and up. And now that it's crossed 7.5, I have it here saying New Orleans -7.5, but that can't actually be the pick, right?
No. And I was like, I don't know if you knew what I was doing there, but I was like trying to block the New Orleans -7.5 just from my view, because it just looks grotesque, right? Like, it just looks wrong. Yes. What are they doing? And listen, I'm the same guy who was like, what are the Chargers doing -8.5 against the Bears, right? And it's like, have you ever seen the Chargers play a cleaner game in your life than you saw on Sunday? Like, I know it's obviously competition oriented, et cetera, right? But like, man, it was a lot of just basic stuff. A dump off to Austin Eckler, et cetera. And so the good news is, if you were looking to prepare for the Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara offense, which is basically just Derek Carr throwing it to Alvin Kamara, having just gotten gashed by Austin Eckler on basically all of those same plays, because, by the way, Austin Eckler under 50 rushing yards was an absolute snoozer, absolute walkover victory, because they were too busy dumping it off to him and just getting whatever he wants. So if you've been sitting there all week and you've been looking at this tape going like, we need to get better at tackling the running back out of the backfield. And like, normally you'd be like, oh man, now you get Alvin Kamara. Like, that's not good news. But like, the point is, these are NFL professional teams, even the Bears. And like, this is the stuff that, if it's obvious that you screwed it up last week, it's the stuff that most, again, assumption of rational coaching here, is the stuff that you would work on. And so honestly, that's kind of the only thing that's scary about the Saints, basically, right? We've talked about the Bears last week, and again, it was true. The Bears' run defense is very good. Problem is, again, the throwing to the running back out of the backfield was not good. So the point is like I think the Bears can. And listen, if Darnell Mooney doesn't get phantom whistled on that first, long play, I think it was literally the first play of the game. I don't know if he scores a touchdown. Maybe he gets to the 20-yard line, right? He's a pretty fast guy, pretty elusive guy. The Bears take a lead, even if it's 3-0. Like, that keeps the Bears at least in a game where, like, the Bears have to be in a positive game script. Like, there's no sort of getting around that. But if the Bears are in a positive game script and they can run the ball with Deontay Foreman, if they can run the ball, with Roschon Johnson, et cetera, like, they can compete because the defense is actually better than people think. By the way, the Saints, I think, are worse than people think. They are getting sort of the credit for constantly playing these kind of dumpy teams, the Colts, basically everyone in their division. And by the way, sometimes losing to these dumpy teams, i.e. Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, significantly at home. And you just look at it and go, like, I want Dennis Allen to, like, have his team. And again, I get it. Same thing as Brandon Staley last week. But it's like, I want Coach A to have his team so buttoned up that they're able to win by more than a score, which is a very difficult thing to do in the NFL unless the opposing quarterback is Clayton Tune. And I only say that kind of hoping more than anything because, again, we don't really know. Maybe Clayton Tune's awesome. Probably not. They probably wouldn't have traded for Josh Dobbs right before the season started if they thought Clayton Tune was good in the first place, but I digress. I don't think last week was on Tyson Bagent. I think one insanely terrible pass, interception was on Tyson Bagent. Mm-hmm. But again, the Saints defense, not particularly good against the run this year. They just gave up almost 7 yards per carry against the Colts last week. I think the Bears can hang in this game if they get maybe, I don't know, a couple of breaks. Maybe they don't get every penalty called against them and no penalties called on the opposing team. Again, cleanest Chargers game I've ever seen in my life. I think, again, we're talking -7. I think there's even some 8s that you can get here. So Bears +8 is certainly the play for me. I've already got that in the account.
I like that a lot. The one thing I find super interesting about this game, though, is just the growing fact that I'm seeing lines now that don't seem real. Like the Saints favored by 7.5 against anyone is just a strange line.
Yeah.
Cleveland being favored by 8 is just a strange line. But we're here. We're in the middle of the season where stuff's going down, right?
But speaking of that Cleveland game and this game, these are your two choices this week for Survivor. Yeah. Because I talked about bangers only week. All the best teams, in a lot of cases, teams that we'd have already chosen, are playing each other. And so when those two teams are playing each other, somebody's got to play the bad teams, right? And so it just happens that the Saints and the Browns are those two teams playing those bad teams. And it's the argument for taking the good teams early in an NFL season when a lot of people are like, save. I want to save this team. It's like, just give it some time, man. You're going to find, whether it's all the backup quarterbacks that come in, every week there's going to be a matchup where it's like really gross team getting 8 points. And it's like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to bet on that team, but I certainly don't want to be laying 8 points with the other team. And like, those are the teams that you can use in Survivor come mid-season. And so when you're sitting there going like, honestly, I think 6 of the top 7 teams that you would use from a money line win probability perspective this week are, by our estimated market rating, like 50 or lower.
Yeah.
Like the Saints, like the Browns with PJ Walker, right?
Yeah.
Teams that are rated around league average are giving 7.5. They're 8-point favorites in these games. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm using those teams. But listen, you gotta use all, you gotta use 18 teams over the course of the season. And these are the spots to take those teams. And that's your choice. Browns and Saints this weekend.
Yes. I
much prefer the Browns, by the way.
You could be taking the Bucs at the Texans, and the Texans. Right. The Texans are at home and favored by 2.5 points. We sniffed out the Panthers and Texans last week. That was one that you got me to switch on. The Panthers beating the Texans. Houston, could they be victim to the kitchen sink game by Carolina last week? Either way, I don't like them at home favored by 2.5. That's a lot for a team that I'm still not really sure about, but I'm also not really sure about Baker. Yeah. So this is really my issue here because it's 2.5, which is less than 3, which like if the Texans won, like, okay, like I wouldn't be stunned, but at the same time, if I'm keeping it simple here, just take the points. There's 2 teams that are like not great. Why am I overthinking this?
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly not great. It's more like, sort of like circumstantially, which team do you trust more in this situation? And so,
Yes.
honestly, listen, and I always sort of say, and this is kind of as like, let's call it cocky as like I get, because I understand like how difficult this gig is, and to sort of be accurate as much as I need to be. Man, like when you're good at this, there's a lot more bad beats than there are good ones, lucky ones.
Yeah.
Last Thursday's Buccaneers plus 8.5. I had 10, but like in my column it was 8.5. Yeah. Was as lucky a win as I mean, listen, it's easy to say as I can remember in the NFL. Like maybe my luckiest of all time. I've had a lot where it seemed like you were about to get a lucky bet, and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under you, and that would have been the case if Mike Evans doesn't haul in the catch. Like that literally required to go off somebody else's helmet for him to catch it. Like I really believe it was just straight to him. Like Mike Evans would have dropped it. Yep. It's like, you know what I mean? Like instead I accidentally catch it. Yeah. So again, keep in mind, this is somebody who was on the Buccaneers who cashed with the Buccaneers last week. This is somebody who was on the Panthers and cashed fading the Texans last week. I just look at that. And honestly, I was kind of impressed with how the Texans played in that game. Or maybe I was bummed out about how the Panthers played. I'm not really sure. We'll sort of get to that in a second. I certainly was not impressed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because, again, I don't really think the Bills are all that good. We'll get to that in a second. So I'm on the Texans minus 2.5 here. I hopped on that at minus 110, like pretty sort of quickly. The juice has kind of come in more on the Texans, but I'm sort of surprised for a week that when you looked at the point spreads on Sunday, it was like 2.5 City. It was like, I think there's 14 games, I think, this week, because there's 4 teams on bye. Is that right?
Yes.
I honestly got, I think 8 of them were minus 2.5, like dead on minus 2.5 on Sunday. And a lot of them have gone to 3 as we've seen and will continue to see.
Yes.
I'm a little weirded out by the fact that this hasn't gone to 3. I think the Texans at home are like a much better team than they are on the road, which by the way is like exactly the type of team that the Texans in their, sort of rebuild here should be. They should be good at home and not very good on the road. Like that wouldn't surprise anyone on their way to a, sort of 6-11, 7-10 type of season where they go and they play some better teams than them on the road, or sort of equal teams to them, and they lose, and maybe they get an upset or two, or honestly really good teams will probably come in and beat them at home. But these games, Raiders, Steelers, Colts, that kind of thing, like these are games that they should win. I realize they lost to the Colts, but like, I just look at this and I go like, the Tampa Bay is about in that same sort of realm. And so I just look at this going like, I'm getting underneath the field goal here with the Texans, who I think, are well coached, bounce back spot, et cetera, et cetera. The rating, it hasn't taken that much of a hit off of last week, but, and I thought their rating was a little too high last week. Which maybe tells me like, okay, like they shouldn't be minus 3 because that would require a rating as high as it was last week. And so maybe 2.5 is the correct number. And I'm just on the sort of side of the Texans kind of playing to the higher end of their range here. And I think that's just the case. So yeah, I mean, give me the Texans here. I don't love the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going forward. And I'm somebody who, again, bet them last week, won. And by the way, like holds plus 800 NFC South division tickets in a division that, by the way, I don't think any of the teams are any good at. Right. So it's like, I would theoretically like Tampa Bay here. I don't know. I guess the thing that bummed me out here is that people were really interested in the Falcons on the road against the Bucs a couple of weeks ago, and they seem to be right about that. And it's just like, if they're right about that, like, what am I supposed to think about the Bucs in this game? Again, having seen that line last week climb to 10 against Buffalo, a team that hasn't covered in like a month, right? So it's just like, man, I think the Bucs might really stink, and I think the market agrees. Which again is why I'm a little surprised it's not 3 yet, but we'll take it at minus 2.5.
Yeah, super interesting stuff there. You are getting me to change this pick to the Houston Texans at under a field goal, as that was one I was wobbling on for sure while creating the picks, much like this next game involving the aforementioned Panthers, who are at home, but are 2.5-point underdogs to the Indianapolis Colts. I don't really like the Colts laying 2.5 points with Gardner Minshew on the road, but he's banged up as well. I'm think he's might still play. He's going to play, but he's
Yeah.
banged up Gardner Minshew on the road, even though I know the ask of Gardner Minshew isn't that much in terms of dumping it down. They got the running game back. I understand all that. I just feel uncomfortable laying points with the Colts on the road, even against the Panthers, which I will say, I am worried about their level of champagne and campaigning that they might have done after their first and possible only win of the season last week.
Yeah.
I don't know, but 2.5-point underdogs at home. I'm on the Panthers.
Yeah, there's a couple of 3 minus 120s out there. That's the number that I'm waiting for to play on the Panthers. Like I said, I was a little bit disappointed because, like, honestly, I didn't think they would need to get to, like, win by a field goal or win by last second field goal against the Texans last week, because I thought the offense was going to be a lot better. I don't know what's gotten into me. I've had 3 totals this week. One of those was the Cleveland Arizona under that I failed to mention, but I think that number that I bet is gone. The other one is over 44 in this game. The idea being Carolina's offense, they're supposed to have, like, new play caller, new play, new you, right? Like, that was the situation for Carolina, and they just didn't really score that much.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I guess. But honestly, I would make a case for, like, the Texans defense being a factor in that. And by the way, like, I would make the case that the Colts defense, again, part of that's injury related. I don't think the Colts defense is very good. And I think they're pretty much an over on a regular basis here, right? And so the Carolina's existence is what's keeping this number at 44, which is kind of like a, pretty much league averagey type number. I think Carolina can have a good offensive game here. I think they probably need to. I think the Colts obviously run the ball well, whether or not Gardner Minshew is sort of, super healthy or not. I think things went downhill for them when he kind of banged up, I believe it was his ankle last week. So, I mean, that's obviously in keeping with the idea that Carolina has a chance here, because after Gardner Minshew, it gets pretty grim from a quarterbacking situation. So again, maybe, listen, at this point, man, you got to handicap at least a little bit the backup quarterbacks on some of these teams, because, I mean, how many injuries do we need to see here from quarterbacks for it to not sort of matter, right? So yeah, I like the over. I like them, to be some scoring here. I'm waiting on 3. There's some minus 120s that have kind of popped up that are available. Let's see if we can get a little bit better pricing on that. Maybe a better injury report on the Colts maybe kicks that up. I don't know. But again, the Panthers, like basically every other team in the NFC South, are a team that can win by 1 or 2 points. Like, things are going to get weird field goal wise. There might be a safety in there, like, a janky 2-point conversion circumstance, right? All of these kinds of things can pop up. So any points are valuable when it comes to the Carolina Panthers. I think, again, because the Colts have had this sort of, they should have beat the Browns 2 weeks ago. They obviously pulled off that fluke win against the Ravens. I don't think the Colts are really all that good. I think they're capable in some instances, but like, again, you get a lot of Gardner Minshew, right? You get a lot of Taylor Heineke, you get a lot of Gardner Minshew, and eventually there's just too much, right? It's like if you end up at a wedding and I'm sitting at your table, like, you're going to love it. You're going to have a really great time, right? Small doses. You want Matt Russell in small doses. You want Taylor Heineke in small doses. You want Gardner Minshew in small doses. If you end up having to live with me, you're like, you know what? This is too much. I made a huge mistake. I got to get out of this. Like, what an idiot I am, right? And it's the same thing. If you have to live with Gardner Minshew, you have to live with Taylor Heineke, you're in big trouble. And listen, I say that, my wife, who does live with me, she went 13-3 against the spread last week.
Hey.
Why isn't she doing the show? At this point, if you could ever sort of understand the idea of, like, thin margins and razor as edges that we're playing off of, we were sweating, unfortunately. I hate to say this because you were on the other side. We were hoping for that field goal to go in for Arizona to backdoor the Ravens, because she was on a heater on Sunday. And like I said, if she can live with me and she can make good picks, anybody can.
Those are the margins indeed. Carolina plus 2.5 there. Another interesting game with 2 bad teams. The Giants at the Raiders. Obviously, late breaking news is the Raiders fired their coach, Josh McDaniels.
Why?
What? I can't believe that happened. I'm stunned. Personally, I'm stunned. Raiders at home favored by 2 points against the Giants. And this is a simple new coach bump. Just getting McDaniels up and out of here. And I don't know if there's a better team that you could possibly play against in your debut as a new coach, or, when, you need to get your morale, boost your morale. I don't know if there's a better team to play against than the Giants, who, they almost beat the Jets last week, right? But found a way to mess that up too. Give me the Raiders. I don't like it laying 2 points at home, but I don't really want anything to do with the Giants either. This is just, I don't even want to talk about this game. Like whichever side, like you could talk me into, you know what, just take the Giants because they both suck. And I'd be like, okay, cool. Like this game, it's just, what are we doing here? But one of the old coaching things is just new coach bump. Let's go. Get McDaniels out of there. Let's get some good vibes. Let's go. Jimmy G's ready to go. You don't even believe me saying that, right? Because I've never said that in my life.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's Jimmy G.
Oh,
I think you're getting Aiden O'Connell here.
Okay.
Yeah. Jimmy G was his. Listen, there's a lot. It's like you want to make statements like Jimmy G was as bad of a quarterback as I've seen all season, and then I'm like, wait a minute, like,
yeah, you can't say that.
You can't say that because, like, Danny DeVito was involved, right? Our guy Tommy DeVito came in for the Giants last week, and like they literally refused to throw the ball down the field. And honest to God, they almost won the game. So, and frankly, should have won the game. Mm-hmm. Shout out Bob Wischusen with the great call for the Jets radio, where like as the ball is going through the uprights for the Jets win, he's like, and honestly, I don't know how the Jets win. Like amazing radio stuff. I kind of love the Giants in this game.
Love the Giants.
Yeah, man. I kind of love the Giants in this game.
Listen, as I said, it's not going to take a lot of convincing to convince me on either of these teams. Like, what are we doing here? It's Giants and Raiders.
Okay, reason to bet the Giants already. Full disclosure, I bet Giants +3 before the Raiders-Lions game because I was like, the Raiders are going to get pumped tonight. This line is going to, come off of 3. So I'm going to take that +3. So I have +3. I don't know that that's going to matter because guess what? I think the Giants are going to win. Couple of things here, right? Like we know Tyrod Taylor's out. If it was Danny DeVito, this line would be way higher because the Giants are not functional offense. I think based on everything that I've heard, and I think it was literally like kind of announced Monday that like Daniel Jones is going to play in this game.
Oh,
let's just start there. If Daniel Jones plays in this game against Aiden O'Connell, the Giants have the better quarterback. Antonio Pierce, who was last seen on the sketchy Herm Edwards Arizona State coaching staff that like basically got run out of Tempe, Arizona, the most laid back place on earth because they were so fraudulent and cheaty and bad, et cetera, et cetera. Antonio Pierce, by the way, former Giants linebacker here, a little bit odd. Is he a sleeper cell? Maybe. He's the one taking over the Raiders head coaching duties. This is a Raiders team, by the way, under Josh McDaniels, who was the only team to lose to Jeff Saturday last year. So like, I realize that's not the same thing as like new coach bump or whatever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like, I imagine Devontae Adams hates everything about his current situation. I think he probably hates Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah. I don't know if he hates Josh McDaniels, but I think they hated John Gruden. And so I think you get that new coach bump when like the team hates the coach. Now he may have lost the locker room. They've won 3 games this season, which is an insane thing to think. So I don't know that they necessarily hated him. Like obviously Monday night's debacle was, a problem. And yes, they needed general manager change type deal. And by the way, they also fired Mick Lombardi, the offensive coordinator. So like we are starting fresh here with the Raiders.
Yeah.
And we're laying points, like any amount of points. I look at this and I go, okay, I was already into the Giants with Daniel Jones coming back. And again, we talked about this last week, Andrew Thomas, the left tackle, potentially coming back.
Okay.
I think, and again, so like I've already grabbed 3. I'm certainly doing nothing but like sitting on that +3. I'm going to bet the money line as part of the round robin underdog money line parlay. So like those 2 things are happening. So I don't really need to do anything to like beat the market to anything. I would just feel really, really, really good if Andrew Thomas played in this game, because that obviously allows them to be better against Max Crosby, who is honestly fundamentally kind of the only thing that I would be ever worried about when it comes to going up against the Raiders. And, honestly, the Giants defense has gotten a lot better in the sort of latter half of the first half of the season, if that, so to speak. Listen, if you're shutting down Zach Wilson, and we're not exactly like starting a parade for you, but like the Giants defense almost won them that game last week. And so now you get another sort of rookie young quarterback who I don't know that is, particularly good here. And again, a desperate Giants team that, by the way, like there's no one has a claim on the 7th seed for the playoffs. The Giants could very well, it was a killer that they lost that game, but they could very well talk themselves into winning this game and maybe a couple of, more coming down the stretch here and just be involved in the playoff chase again, by the way, which is by the way, a team that was like in the mix last year for the playoffs. I'm just looking at the schedule right now. They have their bye week next week. Getting a win, getting to their bye
feeling
week
good
and
feeling
restarting,
good.
I think is really important for the Giants. Whereas like the wheels on a short week are having fired, half the organization are coming off for the Raiders. It's like, listen, the Raiders might win the game and we'll tip our caps to them if they do. It just doesn't seem like a Raiders-y thing to do. A Raiders-y thing is to lose to Jeff Saturday in his first game and be the victim of the team that is getting the new coach bump, not the team that is like getting the new coach bump and playing well, especially again against a Giants team that I think still has a lot to play for, even though last week was just a ridiculous loss that I made money on it, so I loved it. But like, baby, that was
I have an update from Giants practice, and Brian Dable told reporters that Daniel Jones has no restrictions in return to practice.
I don't know how this game doesn't close -1.
There's video of him, like,
Giants.
he's running around, he's throwing the ball, QB1 again. Daniel Jones, get in now, kids, while you can. Moving on to Sunday night football. Bills at Bengals. Big boy game, as I like to call it. Bengals favored by 2.5 points. I have yet to see much from Buffalo versus a good team. And with that said, I feel a lot more confident in the ability to call the Bengals a good team. Other than the Dolphins, Buffalo has beaten the Raiders, Commanders, Giants, and Bucs. Just saying that. I know you had me on that last week and talking about where Buffalo is and what we think about the Buffalo Bills going forward and their ability to be the team that we think they are, the team that we're told they are each and every year. The Bengals on the flip side, I know they've won 3 in a row. It's against the NFC West. But in this matchup of these two teams, the Bengals, if we go back to the previous incarnations of these teams, the past few years, I've liked the Bengals in this matchup through and through. And nothing from what I've seen in Buffalo tells me that I should be changing that this season.
Yeah, easy bet to make. I grabbed it Cincinnati -1.5, biggest bet of the season for me. Which is always something easy to say after you do it, but worth sort of mentioning before I do it. Obviously, we're headed towards 3 here. This is one where, in one way, you got to lay the juice going one way, you got to lay it the other way. This might close 3 flat. And geez, the way it's going, maybe it goes higher. I can't imagine it goes all the way through 3. Honestly, once it goes all the way through 3, like the Bills become a little bit interesting. I'm not going to lie to you. Like Bills plus 3.5 would be kind of crazy. That being said, so I'm just going to sit on my Cincinnati -1.5 and just kind of hope for the best. I hope everybody went out and grabbed their Joe Burrow 50-1 MVP ticket last week and any sort of futures. I know the Bengals AFC was 14-1. This is it. This is why we're in on the Bengals, right? We got the win that we needed at San Francisco. I hope on Sunday night we get the win. Again, who knows what would have happened after the whole DeMar Hamlin situation, but certainly going into that situation, the Bengals looked pretty damn good last year against the Bills, and then confirmed that in the playoffs in Buffalo. I think this isn't that complicated, right? The Bengals are closer to the team that we thought they were going to be before the season. than this team that was hobbled by Joe Burrow's injury and honestly some new stuff on the back end of their defense, right? They had, Jeremy Bates going, Jesse Bates going from, Cincinnati to, was it Atlanta, I believe it was, and it still isn't great necessarily from a, defensive secondary perspective, but like, again, this team is going to score points with Joe Burrow. Like, that's the whole thing, right? Like, they don't need to be like the best defense you've ever seen in your life. They just have to be good enough. They have the defensive coordinator to do it. We have, we're sort of on the brink of buy low season when it comes to the Bengals kind of ending. But if I had said to you, honestly, at the end of last season, even after they lost in that tough road game in Arrowhead in the AFC Championship game, if I had said to you, hey man, like, what would be really sick? If just something happened and it just really knocked down the Bengals, the rating on the Bengals, so that we could just scoop up a bunch of Bengals stuff.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah, man, like that would be fun. That'd be really cool. And I'd be like, well, what do you think would have to happen? And you'd be like, we'd just be sitting there looking at each other going like, I don't know. And like, maybe after a while we'd come up with like, I don't know, maybe he has like a soft tissue injury that kind of affects Burrow for the start of the season. But like, they've got a bye week in like week 6 or week 7. And after that, he's going to be fine. I'd be like, oh man, is it possible they win 2 or 3 games like while he's hurt? And then you say to me like, yeah. I'd be like, oh my God, this is going to be the best because we're going to get all these cheap prices on the Bengals before November hits. And it's going to be awesome. And that's just how I feel about the Bengals, right? Like the thing that we would have loved to happen happened, but because we lived through it on a day-to-day basis and we saw the Bengals playing poorly, it's easy to get kind of caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
But all that happened was like our wishes were granted and everybody sort of sold on the Bengals and we're just like scooping stuff up. And listen, it doesn't mean Joe Burrow's going to win the MVP, but if at the end of the season, his case is, coming back, winning those games, as many, 2 or 3 games with the bum leg, keeping them in it, getting healthy, then putting up the numbers you need to put up, a 40 touchdown, 10 interception type season to be in consideration and getting wins over these good teams, 49ers, Bills. There's a Chiefs game coming down the road here, right? If he's winning these games, if they are winning these games and the Bengals end up maybe division title, maybe even a 1 seed, who knows, right? It's a long way to go here. But if it's the team we thought they were at last season, when everybody was like tripping over themselves to bet them against the Chiefs in KC, remember, like we sussed that out with the whole like Mahomes injury isn't as bad and all that sort of thing. Like we were getting a deal on the Chiefs. It wasn't because we didn't like the Bengals, excuse me. Like we liked the Bengals a lot. It was just Chiefs minus 2.5. And like this week, I'm going to be into Chiefs minus 2.5 in the same way that I'm into Bengals minus 2.5 because I still think we're getting a discount. Because by the way, we're also getting them against a team that I think is still pretty overrated in the market, and that's the Bills.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it a lot. Bengals minus 2.5. You got me there for sure. One more game on the docket here, and it is the Chargers, 3-point favorites in New York against the Giants. And the Jets, pardon me, even though I'm staring at it saying Jets, my brain for some reason went to Giants.
You're so excited about Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal potentially having a chance to play this weekend, which is what Brian Daboll just said as we've been talking. So you're pumped about the Giants. I get it.
Fired up. Also fired up to bet against the Chargers laying 3 points on the road. I don't understand that. Well, I shouldn't say I don't understand this. People watched the Chargers ball out last week against the Bears, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, everything's perfect. Here come the Chargers. Let's go. I'm taking those 3 points with the Jets at home just because I'm thinking about what we normally see from the Chargers. And if you up the level of defense, which I assume the Jets have a better defense than last week's Bears, just a little bit, it might not go as smoothly for Brandon Staley and company. But either way, give me the 3 points and the Jets on the road on Monday night. Give me those points.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? You kind of caught yourself and you're like, I don't understand this. I'm like, I don't really understand it. We're headed to 3.5. You can get 3.5 minus 120.
Ooh.
Like, Jets plus 3.5 minus 120 is, I think, a really, really good bet. Because, like, let's put it this way. It's team that finds ways to lose against team that finds inexplicable ways to win games.
Fair.
what do you think is supposed to happen here? Like, it's like, yeah, the Chargers are supposed to be favored.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about 3. I certainly don't think 3.5, but yes, they're supposed to be favored. And yes, they'll probably screw it up. And the Jets will somehow take advantage of it, and nobody will be necessarily sure how. And like, that's just how this game's going to go. Like, I don't know what's the complication, right? Like, the number is too high because I guess the Chargers rating has gone up. I guess you can take, even though they won the game, I guess you can take the Jets rating down, because my number here and my market, estimation in the market is 1.8 for the Chargers.
Okay.
So how do we get to 3.5? And the answer is like overreacting about a win over the Bears and underreacting to the Jets' just ability to hang in games, malinger long enough that they can actually win these games.
Yeah.
And I think come Monday, right, it's going to be like the Chiefs-Jets game where, like, honestly, maybe the Chargers even take a lead. I would kind of be surprised that they take an early lead. And you're sitting there going like, oh man, like they're, Chargers are going to win this game. Listen, honestly, if it was a couple of things went a little bit different, I think the Bears could have backdoor covered that Charger game, right? Last week. Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm sort of delusional. I don't know that they were ever going to win, but like they certainly could have backdoor covered that with maybe a couple fourth down conversions. But anyway, yeah, I don't think it's that complicated. You're getting points at the team that always finds a way to somehow win. Robert Saleh's pumping the fist. Zach Wilson's kind of like shrugging his shoulders, like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And, and then Herbert's got the weird, like, glove thingy, finger thingy on his hand. Like, that's strange. And yeah, and somehow Brandon Staley screws something up, and here we are, right? Like, this is
my only question. My only question heading into this Monday Night Football game is, how will Aaron Rodgers ingest himself into this broadcast this week?
Rollouts. He's going to be working the rollouts. It's not just throwing. We're going to see him do some practice bootlegs.
Just so ridiculous.
Practice bootleg situation for Rod.
This guy out of here, Aaron Rodgers. Anyways, in between now and then, where can the people find you to get more information that you so crave as the viewing public?
Yeah, man, everything I write over at The Score. You got the app, you get bet mode, right? It's the tab on the far left there, right at the top. Everything that we have over there, we got NBA stuff, we got NHL stuff, and of course, all my football stuff, 2 college football columns a week. I think we're at 7 football, NFL columns a week, Survivor, round robin, underdog moneyline parlay, player props, all of that kind of good stuff. And of course, at MRUS Authentic on Twitter, where pretty much all of that stuff gets retweeted, and we get to celebrate and commiserate every weekend.
I like it. I like it a lot. And you can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Huge shouts to the people liking and subscribing to the pod wherever you get this pod. Thank you for rocking with us throughout the year as we head into week 9, looking for more wins in the win column for sure. As I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is a Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.